Hello and welcome to What the Lux with me, Fred Moore.
And me, Anand Sharma.
Together we lead Matter of Form, a design consultancy specialising in brand, digital experience and content. And this is a podcast that calls time on tired ideas of luxury.
Alongside industry luminaries and thought leaders, we explore what truly defines category-leading products and services. Ben Moncrieffe has an impossible and riveting job in a brand or in a house of brands that is quickly transitioning into becoming more luxury. Your job as head of futures and foresight requires you to do something that is frankly hard in an industry that is changing unpredictably. And I'm looking forward to exploring this with you over the course of the podcast. But you've got to navigate everything from things like the rebrand, everyone's got an opinion on that, through to what it means to have a 57,000 person waiting list for an electric Range Rover that hasn't launched yet, through to tariffs, Chinese EV innovation, replicates, people with very strong opinions all over the place. And your job, in my mind, is less about crystal balls and more about making sense of chaos and backing an opinion on the world and where it's going. Now, for context, Ben came and did an internal podcast that we have at Matter of Form, which is called Know Your Client, and it's designed to remind our team that we aren't our clients' everything. What are our clients' jobs? What do various jobs in the world do? What is the rest of the environment they have to operate in? What is their chaos? And how can we understand and empathize more with them? And he did I was fascinated. Honestly, I was fascinated. Those internal podcasts are highly confidential, and we really get to the nitty-gritty of just like the human condition of what it means to sort of function in different jobs. It was interesting, and I then reciprocated by leaving Zone 1 in London and coming up to the Midlands and talking to about 50 people in JLR's corporate strategy team. And we then went to the pub, and it was lovely. And so I'm definitely in your deficit debt because I'm using up more of your time than you have of mine, but it's lovely to have you back again, this time for an externally facing podcast. Ben, welcome.
Oh, it's a pleasure. And thank you for that intro. I'm flattered.
One of the great things about the job and doing this podcast and actually working in agency is that you get an interesting insight into, different people's worlds, different businesses and how they operate. And all these industries have very unique challenges. And it's humbling, I think, to go and hear what people have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. And you articulated yourself beautifully when you came in and spoke to the team. And I think they were very inspired.
Oh, good. Well, hopefully I do a similar job today. We'll see.
Let's see. Can you just talk to us about what your job role actually is? What is strategic foresight? And how did you come into it?
Well, maybe let's start there. That's probably easier. So, I did a law degree and had visions and dreams of becoming a barrister.
And you still dress like that.
Thanks. I sort of found myself in law. I sort of fell into it, and I'm not the most academic person, but what I loved about it was storytelling, thinking about different cases, thinking about the psychology of people, why people do the things they do, why businesses do the things they do. And there were many things about the legal industry that I hated, and it's quite old-fashioned and stuffy. But what I found in law was what I found my talents, really, which are things like looking at big data sets, making sense of it, telling stories about what that then means, convincing people, influencing, persuading, and really sort of took that with me. I made the decision to get out of law for one reason or another, and was looking for something else. And I sort of found myself in advertising and in marketing, and I worked for a very short time for a couple of advertising agencies, and then I found myself in a job for a small agency at the time was called Communispace, which then became C-Space. And they're a customer centricity consultancy, essentially helping brands and helping businesses understand their customers, understanding purchase behaviors, but understanding, what is it about those brands and those products and those experiences that resonate with them. I sort of loved it. And, I loved the kind of understanding the psychology of people and the difference between what they say and what they say they do versus what they actually do.
I mean, can I ask a question?
Yeah,
on that?
Sure.
It's actually very satisfying when you break someone's bias. who's
Oh,
quite
yeah.
senior.
Totally.
You know, and I would imagine in that job, and obviously you have some exposure to this as well, but 9 out of 10 times you get the expected answer, but it just takes that 1 out of 10 time when you get an insight into what people are actually thinking and behaving that reminds you, just as a human being beyond your work, how different we all are and how much we bring our own preloaded, preconceived idea of this world, notion of things to our lives every day.
Totally.
I'd imagine it's just like quite enriching.
It can be. I mean, the only way I found, and by the way, for what it's worth, I noticed a quote in your Journeys PDF from Danny Kahneman.
Yeah.
Nobody ever made a decision because
Based
of a
on
number.
data, yeah.
They need a story.
Yeah.
And that's one of the, I mean, Thinking Fast and Slow is an amazing book. It's quite dense. That's one of the few things that
But it has been paraphrased by 1,000 pop psychologists ever since.
Yes, I know. But, I think that working in Insight really gave me an appreciation for not only understanding people and why they make the decisions they make and why they identify with the brands that they do, but also more concretely about how to tell that story to business executives and really how to cut through some of the noise. I'm sure I presented 1,000,001 presentations about X number of people want this in the future, or X number of people care about sustainability in their purchasing decisions, blah, blah, blah. Really, the stuff that really lands is the stories of human beings and the stories of people. And I was lucky enough to go all over the world and meet customers and meet people and really understand their psychology and then help businesses make sense of it. And I did that for nearly 10 years. And during the time, Interbrand and C-Space came together. So, it was a sort of brother-sister kind of relationship, not quite a merger, but very, very close relationship. And it was at that time that I started to do more brand strategy. So how do you take a lot of those human truths, those insights, and how do you turn those into winning brand strategies? And for 4.5 years, I ran the global automotive practice for Interbrand and C-Space. So I jumped between the two agencies.
How much literacy was there within Interbrand on research?
A lot, but I would say that what C-Space brought to the table was a much deeper, richer understanding of psychology and innovation, and also of what you can listen to based on what people say and what you can observe. And, there is huge power in ethnography. C-Space was fundamentally a qualitative shop. We did a fair bit of quant, but qualitative shop, and built on psychological principles. So I ran the global automotive practice, and JLR was a client. But I also did loads of work for Allianz, the insurance company. I did loads of work for Uber. I spent a couple of weeks of my life in Cairo taking cabs and trying to understand the difference between the rides and the eats business in Cairo versus a white taxi or whatever.
It's like a beautiful job.
Yeah.
To have at that time in life as well.
Yeah.
You get worldly exposure and you get human insight, and I think gives you empathy and roundedness.
Yeah.
That's rare to find in many vocations.
For sure. And, because JLR was a client and I did a lot of work understanding why have people bought a Discovery Sport or a Range Rover or an F-Pace. I went all over the world doing that. I have a sort of intimate understanding of why our customers buy into our brands. And I did that for a few years, and then I did another role at C-Space for a little while. But I think the thing that always was my sticking point was I don't actually know what it takes to make change happen inside a large organization, because when you're agency side, ultimately you give it to someone else and then it becomes their job. So I made the decision I wanted to go corporate side, and really that was my only objective. Actually, what does it take to make change happen? When I joined JLR, the corporate strategy team, I also made a conscious decision to get out of Insight and into strategy, because I also wanted to see how do you apply a lot of these insights and how do you drive change in an organization with 44,000 people, a global business, that's been doing what they do for nearly 100 years. Now, JLR was a client, so I understood the business quite well, but whoa, was I underprepared for...
Really?
It's a massive organization. And we're only a medium-sized car maker.
Give us the stats.
44,000 people, a significant proportion of those in the UK. We have 9 production facilities. 4 main brands, 1 additional brand. And, it's also important to note that our main centre for manufacturing, which is in Solihull, we're responsible for a huge amount of the employment industry, not just
Yeah.
in Solihull or in Birmingham, but in the UK in general. We're the UK's largest manufacturer, we're the UK's largest exporter. It's enormous. And so, I was quite unprepared for the level of that, even though I still believe the key to change, and I'm sure we'll touch on this, is relationships. And I had some of those when I joined the business, but I think, I had to build more and in order to influence. And so to answer your first question around what is my job, strategic foresight, I always say, or futures in general, is not about predicting the future. It is about minimizing surprise.
It's an interesting way of putting it.
And that's a quote from Carl Schroeder, who's a famous futurist, and I love it because, when I joined the business, a lot of people said they would invite me to meetings, and a lot of my peers in other organizations have the title chief futurist, and it's quite common for somebody to introduce you and say, this is Ben, he has a crystal ball, he's going to tell us what happens in the future. And I always myth bust.
Bring on the pyrotechnics.
Yeah.
Type of thing.
Exactly. And I always myth bust because it's bollocks, really. I actually think that my job is more to help the business be more prepared. My job is to help the business be less surprised. My job is to help the business find growth opportunities, but also drive business resilience and make sure that we avoid risk.
Would this department have existed 20 years ago?
Strategic foresight in its current form is still quite immature, I would say, as a practice. And it is maturing. And, I also, little plug, I also, in my spare time, I co-founded a network of corporate foresighters called FIG, or Foresight Inside Group. And lots of us have been have come into the industry recently, but there's a few who've done it for some time. Futures and trends has been around a long, long time, but as a practice, strategic foresight is quite immature. But it's funny you should ask the question. When I joined the business, I spent about 3 months trying to understand the answer to the exam question, how does JLR prepare itself for the future? And what I found was some really good work, some shoddy trends work, and a lot of, frankly, content. And so what I've tried to do in joining the business is put some structure, and I hate to use the P word, but process around how do we inform brand strategy, product development, corporate strategy, and investment planning.
Can I ask a question about trends?
Sure.
I feel that we have trends anxiety in the world today, in that people are naming things, they're creating trends that are barely substantiated. It's become a market. Trends have become commercialized.
Yeah.
And can you really buy in trends advisory or whatever you call it when actually the incentives are wrong for the person coming in to talk about the trends?
Say a bit more about that.
Say you're trends company X or Y, and you come into an organization to provide like an overview of the market.
Yeah.
I just feel that the trends and the level of change is inflated by those organizations because, frankly, for the same issues that the news faces today, which is big headlines sell, and they justify why you're in the room.
Yeah.
And when things are changing so quickly, do you become a part of that problem? And is it better that companies think about how you detangle those trends and turn them into futures from within?
So yes, is the answer. I totally agree with you. I mean, look, I actually hate the trends word because it's become, like you say, weaponized. I also think that, like, if you're talking about trends, you're too late. Because actually, in my view, a trend is something that's manifested. It's in the environment. You can measure it. You can see it. People are living it through the clothes they wear, the shoes they buy, the food that they eat. And I also think that, there are a lot of businesses who've made a lot of money from selling trends. But I remember 10 years ago when I was agency side, we did some trends work for a project, and, we were talking about 3D printing. And, by 2030, everyone will be printing their own shoes. That was a kind of predicted trend. And I sort of hate that because that's what I mean by content. It's just content. And
I mean, so many of these things, and Gartner hype cycle is like one of my most it's sort of like we were meant to have connected fridges, but no one could tell you what they were supposed to really do.
Yeah.
And the Internet of Things, I mean, you'd expect things to be perhaps more connected than they are, frankly. I'm still amazed by like very basic things like, like I can open my bank with my face on my phone. but I still have keys that scratch the face of my phone in my pocket. And, and just things like that, like I don't carry a wallet. I'm extremely brazen. For years I haven't. Even when I travel internationally, I just do everything on my phone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
they're just very odd, like, I don't know, like imbalances I find, why we still have to unload our dishwashers and sort of rather than just have dry and wet cupboards has always annoyed me. or
you should start a business that does that. That's a good idea.
But it's just really strange, isn't it? That we've automated so many aspects of life. We have cars that drive themselves, but we still move plates from bottom right to top left.
Yeah.
In some bizarre.
Yeah. I mean, look, I like I say, I sort of hate the T word, and instead, my currency at JLR is change in general, and so we tend not to talk about trends. We talk about signals.
Okay.
We talk about clues. We talk about signals of change and the precursor to trends. The other thing I should add is that if you're an FMCG business, and I did a lot of work for the likes of Colgate and Unilever back in the day, you can look at trends because you can react quite quickly, whether it's into a marketing campaign or it's into a new product SKU or whatever it is. In automotive, our development cycles are so long. You're talking, 5 to 6 years to industrialize a product and produce it. You're probably talking a decade before, if we were to open a factory somewhere and that to come online, you're probably talking 10 years before it's like built and fully operational.
I really want to talk about that because it's fascinating. I wanted to, my last thing on trends. What's the half-life of a trend? What's the difference between like a fad, a trend, and sustained cultural change?
I mean, like fads, let me give you a concrete example. Like the metaverse, a couple of years ago we were all talking about it. The label, the metaverse, is a fad or a trend. Yeah. And, the kind of hype cycle boomed and then it kind of dropped off. For me, that typifies in there are a bunch of signals. Yeah. And the signals are development in technology like blockchain, extended reality, VR, AR, development in Web3, in crypto. Those are the
digital twins,
exactly.
Particularly interesting, especially for like hard manufacturing, for like in manufacturing industries, for example,
totally.
Or city design.
100%. Those kind of signals are what I'm interested in.
Okay.
And I've been leading a project for the last couple of years to explore what should JLR do in the metaverse or in that broad space of Web3. And we've done that by looking at the underlying technologies and looking at the use cases and looking at the opportunities and all the risks and so on and so forth, rather than just saying, oh yeah, the metaverse trend, that's the thing.
So you see a trend as like a sort of gloopy swarm of signals.
Yeah, exactly.
It doesn't make it sound attractive when I put it like that, does it?
Yeah, but you're right. That's it. That's it in a nutshell. And, my job is to one of the points you made earlier about kind of making sense of it all. I often say that the key to strategy is the same as comedy, timing, and,
Quite.
And I think that the key for me is to take a long-term view for the business and push the business to think long-term, but also have a sense of realism about what can the business conceivably respond to. And I have to be really plugged in to what the business is up to and what people are doing. And, my team do sort of audit the business to try and understand how prepared we are for some signals of change. And then it's my job to kind of ring the bell when I think that something is a big deal and we should be jumping on it, or just let it go.
So what are the types of things that come to you? What are the types of things you've had to demodel?
The shift from premium to luxury.
Yeah, that's a big one.
That's the biggest one, I would say.
Electrification.
Electrification, another. I mean, we can touch on electrification in more detail, but what I would say is that the shift to electric is a huge deal for our industry. And people who work in the industry, that's all you hear about. And if you were to ask anyone on the street, they would, and what are the big things affecting the automotive industry? They would say things like electric cars and batteries and so on and so forth.
Because it impacts their day-to-day behaviour, but actually does it make that much of a difference? Anyway.
Yeah, well, I suppose my point is that, do you fundamentally care about what drives your car? Do you know that much about the engine? You only care if it affects you. You only care if the range is an issue or it's a nightmare to charge, or, you're concerned that the battery might die one day. And so, or you're concerned from a sustainability point of view about where the materials come from. Increasingly, we try and look at it like it's a Range Rover. It doesn't really matter whether you put petrol in it or whether you charge it. You know, it should still be the same experience. It's a Range Rover, and it's electric. And it's our job, actually, to reduce the friction that people feel around the change from internal combustion to electric cars. Honestly, it's also really only an issue because we talk about it too much. You know, as automotive execs, we talk about it far too much. I mean, the case study I always use is, do you remember years ago in the 90s when we all had camera phones and we used to talk about megapixels?
Yes.
How many megapixels in your camera? Nobody talks about megapixels anymore. It's
No.
not an issue. Because cameras have got so good, you wouldn't tell the difference anyway. Batteries will do the same.
Yeah.
You know, I'm fairly confident of that. It'll become a non-issue at some point. The question is when, and how can we get people to believe and have a level of reassurance and trust. One of the questions that you asked me before we joined was around ownership versus access.
Yes.
And, you know, that is a big topic. But I do think that people will always want to own things, particularly in luxury.
Yeah.
You know, it is a symbol of status, and I think that will persist. There are access models, and there will be more access models, particularly for cars. You know, we have a subscription service called Pivotal. We have a rental service called The Out. Plenty of other car manufacturers have had a go. BMW famously had a go, and it wasn't that successful.
What happened with it?
They just weren't making enough money. You know, the business models are really challenging. But
I regret not getting a Pivotal subscription.
oh, well, you should.
Because my BMW has depreciated so much.
Yeah. I think that there will be more access models. And I also think that the more electric cars there'll be, the more you'll start to see things like second and third hand car leasing.
Yeah, okay.
And so, you know, that'll become a huge market, and people will be able to choose whether they want to buy one or whether they don't. I also think that what the luxury industry in automotive has not yet cracked is the soul of the thing. I've heard you use that phrase before. You know, I think for lots of car buyers, they believe the soul is in the engine, and in the smell and the sound. But actually, I think there is, having sat in and driven an electric Range Rover, the soul is there, the character is there. You know, I've also sat in one of our new Jags, and the soul is there. You know, it's the character is kind of there. And so we need to do a better job. The luxury automotive industry needs to do a better job of bringing that soul to the fore through craftsmanship or materiality or storytelling, whatever it is, to almost negate the fear of missing out or losing something because it's not an electric car. I also think that we should see that as a massive opportunity to communicate what our brand stands for in different ways when the performance is the same.
Let's talk about the brand, actually. Can you just talk about the spirit and soul of Jaguar, and then kind of the journey or decision-making process that led to the House of Brands? Because I think that's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I was actually lucky enough when I was at Interbrand to work on the Land Rover brand strategy prior to joining JLR. And it wasn't the only reason, there were many reasons, but a big part of that piece of work kind of said that, you know, Range Rover's increasingly got a huge amount of equity with consumers, and, you know, even down to the level where people who buy a Range Rover don't say that they drive a Land Rover. They were saying that they drive a Range Rover. You know, people who drive an Evoque still say they drive a Range Rover.
Yeah.
They don't say they drive an Evoque, you know, much to the annoyance of people who've bought full-size Range Rovers or Range Rover Sports. So that was one thing. The second thing was that we sort of recommended that, you know, there was huge potential in the Defender brand, and it's a hugely successful product. And, you know, there were opportunities to pull Range Rover and Defender away from one another. So when I joined the business, they made that call.
So when you look at old Defenders, they are essentially Land Rover Defenders.
Yes.
When you look at new Defenders, they're Defenders.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
the problem is it's hard to enact this change in an industry where you have like a fair amount of legacy products in full view.
100%. That's the biggest challenge, actually. And I think that part of my role, given my background at JLR, has also been to fundamentally educate the business on what brand is all about and the power of brand and what brand can give you the license to do and what brand stretch is. And I think part of the challenge is also we're one of the few organisations, I don't know if it's ever been done actually, that's gone from one brand and tried to split it into 3, if not 4. Land Rover sort of doesn't cease to exist. We still use it as a trust mark for a lot of our off-road technology and so on. But, it's now split into Range Rover, Defender, Discovery and Freelander. I think that is really hard and that is really tough. I think the soul of Land Rover, in terms of, I think I mentioned to you, we've been working a lot with brand archetypes. The soul of Land Rover in terms of freedom, adventure, unstoppability still exists in Defender, for sure. We often use the phrase, we the unstoppable, or embrace the impossible to talk about Defender. It can be adventurous, it can be extreme. Range Rover is not that. Range Rover is about leadership. Range Rover is about refinement and elegance. More traditional luxury attitudes, I would say. So that's the soul of Land Rover, I would say, that still exists in all the new house of brands, but just in different ways. And by the way, we're very passionate about the Land Rover brand and our history and our heritage, 100%. And for what it's worth, the same is true for Jaguar.
Yeah, they all represent a different facet of luxury anyway, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would agree.
What Land Rover stands for, I always talk about like the slower path becoming, the more premium option. For me, that's become a luxury, and Range Rover is luxury. I've always seen Jaguar as fairly luxury, but I think I've got something in my mind from just seeing them parked outside 10 Downing Street.
Yeah, I mean,
so
I would suggest that Jaguar was a luxury brand and sort of lost its way a little bit for a few years, and now we're trying to bring that essence back. I think, again, from a brand archetype's point of view, in my opinion, Jaguar has always been the kind of outlaw archetype.
Yeah.
A sense of rebelliousness, disruption, fearlessness, creativity. And that's still the same. I mean, you might remember the Villains campaign from years ago. Yeah. It's good to be bad kind of idea. The Jaguar CX-75 was in a Bond film as the Villains car, And whilst we have stepped away from that campaign, the sense of fearlessness and creativity and exuberance and you've probably heard the phrase "copy nothing," to go against the grain and do something differently, is still there as the soul.
What is the founding story?
Well, so William Lyons, who founded Jaguar, he felt that Jaguar should be a copy of nothing, and he felt that it should be different and beautiful, and should stand for creativity.
What was his vibe?
I mean, I never met the guy, so I can't tell you. But I think he was, from what I understand, a kind of a bit of a maverick in terms of his desires and his want for the brand, and you can see that in the product.
Yeah.
When you stand or sit in an E-Type, or when you sit in an XJS. My granddad had an XJS, or when you sit in an XJ220. It feels different, and the kind of soul and character of disruption and rebelliousness is sort of there. Also, there's a few stories like the XJ220 was developed as a side project behind the scenes by a few kind of entrepreneurial engineers.
That's cool.
There are stories that are legendary about when the E-Type was unveiled at the Geneva Motor Show. It was mobbed so much that one of our test engineers had to drive the other E-Type, which was in the Midlands in the UK, to Geneva overnight.
Really?
And he got it there the next morning, and so William Lyons said to this chap, he said, right, thanks for driving all night from like 3 a.m. from the Midlands. I now need you to ferry people up and down the hill climb all day. So that, I don't know, that's sort of like, British character and wit and kind of, tally ho, let's just go off and get it done. It's quite fun. I think, if I'm honest, we need to tell that story more, particularly in Jaguar. We have amazing heritage and amazing stories to tell, but also a perspective on culture and a perspective on tired ideas of luxury, and a desire to be different and progressive. Actually, we have used the phrase modern luxury, which I sort of feel like has lost all meaning. Yeah. But at its core, it's really just about being progressive, being forward-thinking, trying new ideas, playing with ideas like sustainability, and having a different approach to culture and craft, and having a point of view on topics.
Yeah.
rather than kind of
Why
time.
luxury?
Honestly, there are lots of reasons, but I think that we're not the biggest car maker in the world. You know, we're a medium-sized car maker. We do really good numbers when it comes to Range Rover and Defender. But I also think that if you want to make things at volume and you want to make things at scale and you want to have those kind of efficiencies, you need to become a very, very different business. And I don't think we have the scale or the investment or the potential to become a Toyota or even to become a BMW and do kind of 2 million cars a year, which is how many they do.
Yeah.
You know, I think for the size and scale of our business and where the growth is, and also, I should add, the heritage of many of our brands and our products, it's luxury. So I think and maybe coming full circle to the role of my job, you know, my job is to have a theory about the future, find growth opportunities and place bets. And for us, the shift to luxury, it's a bet that we're making and a bet we think we can win in.
Do you ever envisage a future where we reprioritise the purpose of a car from being something that ultimately gets you from A to B, ideally as quickly as possible, into like an office on wheels or a living room on wheels? Or
Maybe is my answer to that question. Like, there are opportunities when a car is fully autonomous to do more things. But, you know, again, this is where I have to add a sense of realism for our teams. I did a study quite a few years ago now, I think it was 2018, maybe 2019, looking at big comprehensive global study of what people would do in an autonomous car. So here's a bunch of use cases, here's a bunch of things you could do in the car, and we also gave them curveballs like, well, what if you could do yoga in the car? You know, what if you could sleep in it? What if you could have sex in the car?
Yeah.
Would you do that?
Yeah.
And the number one thing that people the number one thing that people said they would do in an autonomous car was nothing.
Right, that's interesting.
The same thing you do on a train.
Stare
out
the
the
no one's
window.
ever doing nothing because they're looking at their phone. Do you ever
Sure.
investigate if you could kill off motion sickness?
That's an issue, actually. So, you know, me included, I do get motion sickness in autonomous cars, having been in a few.
But not even autonomous cars. A lot of people just get sick looking at their phone in a normal car.
Yeah, I think all these technologies give you, and to answer your question about do I think that a car might be a home office or a living room on wheels, maybe.
What about flying cars, Ben?
I think that, you know, people have been saying that fully autonomous cars are 5 years away for the last 20 years. People have also been saying that flying cars are 10 years away for the last 30 years.
I was actually sort of slightly being a bit facetious, but we do actually did work for a period of time with a company called Vertical Aerospace, and this was sort of their mission.
You'll be able to get one, but in very small, very well-defined use cases, probably for the richest people. And
you don't take that back to your board?
Honestly, I think that for the volume we're producing and for the investment portfolio that we have, maybe it might be something we look at in the future, but not for now. I honestly think it's still incredibly niche. I went to visit a startup in Silicon Valley who were building a flying car capable of vertical takeoff.
Yeah.
And they were doing their best and doing a very good job and making their own carbon fiber and all this kind of stuff. And they also had a license to test it. And it does drive at under 20 miles an hour and it is capable of vertical takeoff. But honestly, think of the regulation required to open low-level highways in the sky. Think about pylons, think about birds, you know, think about...
But then think about cities that are being built from the dust in regions that have no development. You
Sure.
know, the thing is, you know, I guess that when you remove the infrastructure and policy challenge, which is a challenge, you know, I mean, we've had autonomous cars for the last 10 years, and every year Elon Musk like, it's going to be this year, but it's not really because of the technology, it's mainly because of the policy, isn't it?
Yes.
Isn't it? I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, it is.
You know, so just take them to Saudi Arabia.
Yeah. I mean, look, like I say, very small places, defined use cases. On a global scale, when we're a global manufacturer, betting those kind of horses is pretty tough. I mean, if you're Toyota...
But do you create skunk works for it, or do you need to invest in or purchase businesses that look into these things? Because you are big enough to have to presumably defend against a future that is deeply uncertain and may not always result in something that can commercially be rolled out.
Yeah, so we do that through two means. So one is we have an open innovation program where we work with startups and develop proof of concepts. So the metaverse project I mentioned that I've been running, we've developed a virtual brand experience for Defender. And we've done that with a startup. That's the only way we've got that off the ground.
Okay.
You know, we've done lots of other proof of concepts with other technology businesses, and we have a very successful corporate venture capital business called InMotion, who invest in circular materials, who invest in semiconductor chips, who invest in slightly risky investments, which keeps our toe in the water.
How much material innovation is there in the automotive industry?
Lots.
Really?
Yeah. Weight is the number one challenge right now, particularly in an electric car. You know, a full-size Range Rover electric is getting on for 3 tons. So think about trying to stop one of those things. Think about the brakes. Think about the heat, the friction. Weight is a massive problem, and so material innovation is huge.
I quite want to talk about the rebrand, actually, the new cars a bit.
Mm-hmm.
I've always found it interesting, like the more people love something, the less keen they are on either it changing or it attempting to enter new markets or cater to new audiences. People become quite protective. Mm-hmm. And so the more something means, the harder it is to change it.
Yeah.
It's kind of an obvious thing to say. But did you expect the level of... it was a bizarre level of media divisiveness.
I mean, look, you know, I think a lot's been talked about on this topic, and I think it's fair to say we didn't underestimate it, but I think we were... And I wouldn't say we were unprepared. I think we were surprised by how it was latched onto. And I think we were prepared for the level of emotion, but probably not the level of kind of, or the spectrum of positivity and real negativity and vitriol around the rebrand. You know, I'm in a luxurious position, whereas I you know, because I sit in corporate strategy, I have a sort of bird's eye view. So I wasn't involved in Jaguar's kind of relaunch directly, but I think that I did have a sort of luxurious position of seeing everything from a bird's eye view. And look, I think, of course, I would say this because I work in this business, but we went from the least talked about car brand in the world to the most. And I'm not going to comment on the creative, or I'm not going to comment on the logo or the typeface or even the color of the car. But what I will comment on is, if you want to be disruptive and you want eyes, you know, box ticked, really. The challenge now is we've got to back it up. We've given ourselves a shot, and we've got to back it up, and we've got to deliver. Having seen the product that will...
There's something special about the car in real life.
Yeah.
I don't actually think it was adequately captured on film or camera. It really is quite striking.
It's very different in the flesh.
It's very different in the flesh.
It's very different when you sit in it as well. I would just encourage people, if they're interested, to try and see it in person, because it's quite striking. It's quite something in person.
What's your opinion, Ben, on luxury more broadly? You've obviously gone through a journey of trying to understand JLR's place in the world of luxury. Luxury means different things to different people. So you probably have to decode culture, status, everything from the world of handbags to the world of private aviation, and reassemble those molecular components into some sort of framework for Jaguar, for JLR. And on that journey, you've no doubt picked up some signals and clues.
Yeah, I mean, that's been my life actually for the last 2 years. You know, what is modern luxury? How is the luxury industry changing? What are some of the signals of change, and what are some of the things that will persist? And done a lot of work with a few critical business partners at JLR to try and do that. And also, I should add, try and influence the cultural change required inside the organisation. I frequently talk about inputs rather than outputs. A luxury experience is an output.
Yeah.
The input required to do that is fundamentally a behavioural or a mindset shift. And so I think there are many things about luxury that will persist. You know, a sense of provenance and heritage and craftsmanship and even ownership, prestige, you know, a sense of taste making, a sense of leadership, a sense of value, or kind of, you know, extreme perceived value. Some luxury commentators talk about that's what luxury is about. Appreciating assets. All of those things, I believe, will persist. You know, you don't just, because of a generational shift, those things don't disappear. But what you're starting to see, driven by young people, is more progressive attitudes to luxury, whether it's quiet or silent luxury, or whether it's sense of progressiveness or forward thinking, or even activism. Luxury businesses having an opinion on something and using their leadership position to stand for something, or whether it's sustainability or regenerative design or whatever it is. If the way I explain it to my people internally is, if anything, it's just more luxury, more ways that you can show you are luxury. And that's great. That's an amazing opportunity. We should see that as an amazing opportunity, and also use it to challenge quite tired kind of notions of the luxury industry, which I think you and I agree that some of those tired notions are pretty old hat and too elitist, actually. There's a real opportunity for us to do something different and embrace some of those modern dimensions.
I think re-engineering, understanding the behavioural psychology, the truth behind how people express status, express aspects of their personality that are primal. I think we can be like a bit, we're too afraid to call a spade sometimes with how we're wired and how we want to fit into society and how we want to have a sense of belonging to a tribe, how we peacock. People are unwilling to get to the truth of those things. When you then look at things like, you mentioned earlier talking about this, the status of ownership. I think it becomes really interesting when you look into like how you re-engineer that in the context of subscription. And how do you create new signals, or how do you create new markers that help people feel something or feel permanent attachment to something that's fundamentally transient?
I mean, look, I think that luxury for me is, there are a number of hygiene factors. Quality is one, a sense of craftsmanship or storytelling or provenance is another. A sense of belonging or identity is another one, and service is probably another. But over and above that, you've got 1,000,001 things you can use, 1,000,001 tools in your toolbox that might make sense for your brand and might make sense for your customers. But I also think that there's a broader spectrum of people now. Some people looking for exclusivity and status and wealth, and some people looking for, a sense of trust or quality or quiet luxury. Yeah. That's a win. That gives you more space to play. It gives you more opportunities to meet customers where they are.
But no one ever in the world of quiet luxury is looking to be that quiet. They're just looking for something that you have to look harder to qualify.
Yeah.
And so it's just a harder treasure hunt.
That's true, but I would challenge that some people are looking to look great and some people are looking to feel great.
Do you see risk of being usurped by the big tech companies?
Of course.
Yeah.
I mean, look, even if you look at the Chinese market, it's been a massive proliferation of new entrants, new automotive companies. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of new electric car brands, because, like you say, the barriers to entry are lower. BYD started as a battery manufacturer rather than a car company. Really interesting story, actually. And so, like you say, the barriers to entry for businesses out there are arguably lower. But because there's so many of them, I'd be willing to bet there will be a consolidation at some point, because it's damn expensive to run a car company. Yeah. And to industrialize and to ship and distribute and manage your supply chain. Yeah, I think there'll be a consolidation at some point. And the question is who will survive? To your point about customer touch points and service, for the longest time as an industry, we saw the likes of Google and Apple as a major risk. Now we're embracing it, actually, because people want it. You carry your phone around with you. It's not a phone anymore. It's a personal assistant, and actually you want that interface replicated in your car. So, we offer that in all of our vehicles, and we'll continue to do so. That leads you to the next question around: do we need to keep producing HMI or human machine interface in the car? What do people actually want from us? Do they want a total Apple operating system? Yeah. And then the next question is, what is our secret sauce? What do we bring to the table? And really, for a brand like Range Rover, it's about materiality, it's about craftsmanship, it's about elegance, it's about how the materials are put together, it's about how you feel when you get in the environment, it's about how do we use technology to enrich your experience. What if the car could sense your mood or sense your preferences and the environment changes to suit,
Well, I think there's a big opportunity in innovation around emotion.
Totally.
And, you only have to have gone to a gong bath. I'm actually going to one this evening. You're welcome to join me. To know that, your bones resonate at different frequencies, and the reason a gong bath is effective is because it sort of cleanses negative charge from your system. We're electromagnetic, and audio has a powerful impact. I mean, I went to a listening experience with Kev on the weekend, and sort of, I was basically weeping by the end of it. It was a sort of £180,000 speaker that were playing to me somewhere underground in Soho, the R&D. But sorry, it's a digression, but sound has a powerful impact on mood. So does light. Yeah. So does scent.
Totally, and so does movement. And I think that is a fascinating space for us. And
what about the tactility of like dials and switches, and like how something feels when you turn it on or off, and the interplay between that and user experience, rather than it just being one way or the other?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's about balance. Yeah. And, I think that we have some customers who want everything in a screen, and we have some customers who want the tactility of buttons and switches. And there are some car manufacturers that I'm not going to mention that have gone one way, and some that have gone the total opposite way. And
who's gone the opposite?
Well, I don't say this in a derogatory sense, but, there are lots of luxury automotive brands, Aston Martin, Bentley, where there is tactility there. And then there are lots of Chinese manufacturers where actually everything is in the screen, Tesla being a good example of that as well. And I'm not saying one is right and the other one is wrong. Actually, what I'm saying is you've got to do what's right for your brand, and you've got to do what's right for the overall brand experience and the overall product experience. So coming back to your point about sensory and emotive technology, that'll give us the ability to change so much about in-cabin experience, and so you can have a different experience depending on which side of the bed you've got out of. What if your car was enriched with healthcare technology? What if your car was enriched with biotech? What if your car was super connected? Think of the possibilities that could enable. I see more potential in that than I do in the autonomous world.
Like climbing into a spa every day.
Totally. Or, what if it was a meditation zone? Or, I mentioned before, most people want to get in their cars and do nothing. Well, what if you could enrich the nothing? One fun anecdote, you'll appreciate this. When we did that study of what people will do in an autonomous car, we couldn't work out why just going for a drive was quite high in most Western markets except Germany. And the reason just going for a drive is not a thing in Germany is because it's against the law. You cannot drive without purpose in Germany. You can be fined up to 50 euros.
Are you joking? In a country with no speed limit on autobahns, can that be your purpose? Just having
no. You have to be going somewhere.
Has that always been the case?
I don't know, but at the time when we did the study, which is a few years now, I that made me laugh a lot. I thought that was very funny. But yeah, what if you could enrich people's in-cabin experience in other ways so that they could do nothing but also feel well afterwards?
Yeah. What would you change about your industry if you could change something?
I think I would probably change how vertically people who work in automotive look at it. And the shift to luxury has forced us as a business to think laterally, to think about what we can learn from other luxury businesses, from hospitality, from technology. But automotive is, people who work in automotive often have only worked in automotive, and there are norms of our industry, whether it's manufacturing or whether it's supply chain or whether it's design or whether it's processes. That's the way it's always been done. And part of my role is to fundamentally challenge a lot of those things. So I would change how insular the industry is and encourage people to think laterally.
It's quite interesting because that's one of the things that's fun about working in luxury.
Totally.
It's bizarrely sector agnostic because you're dealing with the experience layer. And that's the real point of differentiation and understanding the customer. And It's interesting.
Totally. It's not about a handbag, it's about a brand world.
Exactly.
It's about what you buy into, it's about your identification with that brand. It's it's not just about staying in a Hoxton or staying in a Savoy or a Six Senses. It's actually about the end-to-end experience. I mean, Aman's a great example of a business that fundamentally is a hotel group, but has gone into ceramics and fragrances and other sectors. That is the beauty of luxury.
It really is. What most concerns you about the world that we're leaving? My kids, and not yours because you don't have any, but...
I mean, sustainability, climate change would be the obvious answer. But for me, actually, I spend so much of my day thinking about risk and thinking about geopolitics and macroeconomics. That, for me, is the bigger fear. How fragmented the world is and how polarizing people's views are, particularly in the US, but, also in places like China, also in the Middle East, also in this country. Why can't people just get along? is kind of my biggest concern. And my wife and I were talking about, like, do we need to start stockpiling tins and loo rolls, and do I need to build a bunker in the garden? All these kind of things, sort of tongue in cheek, but also serious. So that's the main thing that concerns me.
Just a side question to that: what would you change about the narrative on sustainability?
I would change the narrative around, like, net zero. And, I think that sustainability is everyone's problem. It's business's problem. It's investors' problem. It's government's problem. It's my problem. It's your problem. It's all of our problems. And, I think that it's become a slightly weaponized issue, particularly in this country, the whole kind of rhetoric about net zero. And I think, can we not just get back to the simple thought of, surely putting CO2 in the atmosphere is forever is a bad idea.
Yeah.
It's just common sense.
Yeah.
Recycle a bit more, buy less petrol, be less wasteful, look after your things. It's quite simple, really.
People get angry about being told things, then they go the other way.
Yeah.
If you had to give up your job tomorrow, what would you do?
If I had to give up my job tomorrow, I mean, when I was a kid, I wanted to be a racing driver. That was always my dream. But I think, if I had to give up my job tomorrow, I love the hospitality and hotel sector. My wife's amazing, by the way. She's like hops between credit cards and earns points and, finds deals on flying places and going to amazing hotels. And I'm fascinated by the hospitality sector. That's for sure. I also think that I'm a big biker. So, the concept of motorbikes, and I actually think as an industry built on passion for the thing, for the craftsmanship behind motorcycles, like I think there's real interesting equity in that. Like when all the cars are autonomous, people will be looking at bikes because
that's interesting.
That's how much fun you can have, track days, little kit cars, motorbikes that people can tinker with.
And then lastly, just what's the most exciting thing, Ben, for you in the next 5 years?
Honestly, simple stuff.
Increase in lithium battery sizes.
I mean, in my personal life, spending more time with my amazing wife. Like, honestly, we have such fun and we travel as much as we can, and we have such a laugh. I think we're in a really amazing point in our life. We don't have any children yet, where we can just enjoy stuff. Professionally, look, I think the whole space I mentioned about biotech, sensory and emotive technology, and in-cabin environment, that's kind of fascinating. I'm really excited about that, particularly in luxury. It'll open so many doors and give us so much innovation potential, and you'll start to see less of this focus on screens and more of this focus on environment.
Exactly. And that's why I find actually the work of people like Nuri Oxman at the MIT. I don't know if you've ever seen that, the sort of designing where they're basically growing new materials. And you just think like how much material we use to just build stuff in this world, and so much of it's just like plastic or like cut down trees, or it's just wild. Ben, it's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Much.
Thanks so much for listening. This has been What the Lux. You can find us on socials at Moncrieffe, and drop us any questions or comments on Twitter using the hashtag #WhatTheLux. Or if you're a luxury brand looking for strategy and design that goes beyond the banal, Get in touch via hello@muchreform.com and chat to one of our consultants.